The building woke with a scream as alarms knifed through the executive floor, and the market feeds bled red across glass walls. Jordan Hale stared at a headline that shouldn't exist, and the room felt 3 inches smaller. Elena Brooks said, "It broke everywhere at once, and her tablet kept vibrating like a trapped wasp." The stock plunged in violent steps, each tick a fresh bruise on reputation. Jordan said, "Find the origin and shut it down," but the words sounded like someone else. Maya Cross said, "We contain, then narrate, or we drown," and she didn't blink. PR chimed in from a speaker, voices overlapping like sirens at an intersection. Casey from operations said, "People are filming the floor," and hands clenched over badges. A rival network flashed Victor Langston's smile, and the air turned colder by a degree. Jordan said, "He knows more than he should," and a pane of glass showed his reflection split by a hairline crack. Elena said, "Trust is evaporating," and the elevator dinged like a countdown. The empire felt suddenly rented, and every second charged interest. The war room felt borrowed, a place you enter only when fate has filed a complaint. Jordan stood at the head, knuckles pale against the table edge. Maya said, "The leak references filings we never published," and silence made the fact heavier. Elena said, "Narrative must arrive before panic becomes identity," and she slid a draft across the table. Our screens spat contradictory advice, each square demanding the first move. Jordan said, "Own the truth we can verify, deny what we must, and anchor the rest." A chorus of legal cautions poured in, cool as rain through a crack. Casey said, "Security found outbound metadata at 3 a.m., and the timeline tightened around their throats." Jordan said, "We audit devices now," and pens stopped tapping. Somewhere down the hall, the elevator chimed a taunt. The building had learned their names, and it was practicing how to say goodbye. Jordan walked the floor like a statue being asked to move. Eyes tracked him the way storms track coasts. Casey said, "People think the story is bigger than the truth," and her voice had grit. A junior analyst flicked away a camera app, cheeks hot with guilt. Noah Reed said, "If we stabilize the data pipelines, we can trace the breach path and the undercurrent shifted." Jordan said, "Do it, and bring me proof. Not hope," and the room tightened into task. Derek Vale leaned on a column, with a notebook that looked too new. Elena said, "Whispers multiply faster than memos," and someone laughed without humor. Maya said, "Every narrative vacuum gets filled," and she pointed toward the news wall. Victor's clip rolled again, tidy as a knife. Jordan kept moving, pretending the floor wasn't tilting. The board dialed in like a tribunal, portraits of concern arranged by bandwidth. A tranquil painting behind Jordan looked suddenly sarcastic. Maya said, "Liquidity remains adequate if we control narrative velocity," and the phrase sounded like trash. A muted tile revealed Victor waiting in a separate studio, the rival timing his statements to their breath. Jordan said, "We are under coordinated attack," and the line did not tremble. Elena said, "We announce an internal review led by outside counsel," and a few tiles nodded in unison. A private message bled across Jordan's screen from an unknown handle. It read like a riddle and a threat. Jordan said, "Who else is on this call?" and the question hung, accusing the pixels. Somewhere, a dog barked in someone's home office, and the tension cracked then resealed. Night dragged its sleeve across the city and left the windows smeared with glow. Jordan stepped onto the rooftop to make the air pick a side. Arthur King said, "I thought the crown would feel lighter off my head," and his laugh was tired. The skyline blinked like a patient on monitors. Jordan said, "They moved before I even woke, and the truth tasted metallic." Arthur said, "Comfort breeds blind corners," and he tapped his cane like punctuation. Elena called with a list that read like triage notes. Maya texted a time and a place and an ultimatum. Jordan said, "I will not bleed out in a boardroom," and a helicopter's thrum stitched the sentence. In the dark, the empire looked small enough to pocket and drop. Morning sunlight felt artificial against the crisis that lingered from the night. Jordan Hale entered the boardroom with a stride meant to imitate control, but the silence already held judgment. Elena Brooks said, "We've patched the first fire, but smoke still seeps through," and she pointed to reports stacked like bricks against a flood. "Maya Cross," said the rival's narrative grows louder. "People believe Victor's calm more than our defense," and her tone was clipped steel. Casey Miller said, "Cameras are circling our lobby like hawks, and the screens confirmed it." Jordan said, "Then let them see a man unbroken," but the words dug no roots. A message blinked from an encrypted channel, unsigned, promising more leaks. Jordan said, "We are bleeding from inside," and the phrase made the table colder. The board's portraits on the walls seemed to glare, as though the paint itself disapproved. He clenched his jaw and said, "Find the traitor, or all of this crumbles by nightfall." The cafeteria buzzed with whispers louder than spoons on porcelain. Jordan walked through, the air parting but not welcoming. Noah Reed said, "People say our systems were always fragile," and his words carried the tone of gossip recycled into prophecy. Jordan said, "Then let them say it to me," and the surrounding eyes ducked. A junior staffer murmured, "He's losing grip," and the phrase spread faster than steam from coffee. Casey said, "You can't fight shadows with anger," but the bite of her tone admitted fear. Elena said, "The undercurrent is moving against us," and she scanned faces that refused to meet hers. Maya said, "Control the whispers, or the whispers control you," and she pressed her hand flat to the table like she was holding down a map. Jordan lifted his cup, the surface trembling, and said, "Then silence them before they bury me alive." Victor Langston's press conference streamed like a verdict disguised as a sermon. He said, "We stand for stability where others falter," and the line cut into them like glass. Maya muttered, "He bleeds confidence because he scripted the wound," and her eyes stayed on the screen. Elena said, "Investors believe what looks calm, not what is true," and she crossed her arms. Jordan said, "Then we'll rip his mask off," though the conviction sounded rehearsed. Casey reported, "Cameras outside doubled, and they're waiting for a fall." Noah said, "If Victor has the leak, he's feeding it with precision," and the theory tightened the air. Jordan slammed his palm against the table and said, "Then precision must meet force." The screen flickered as Victor smiled, and even the pixels looked smug. The corridors whispered louder than the people. Jordan walked past framed awards that mocked his confidence, each plaque a reminder of comfort now punished. A group of employees huddled, their words clipped when he neared. Casey said, "They think you're hiding more," and her glance was apologetic but firm. Jordan said, "I've hidden nothing but my exhaustion," yet the walls gave no sympathy. Elena said, "Trust evaporates in silence," and she urged him to address the staff. Maya said, "Words can steady a storm if delivered like thunder," and her hand tapped her tablet. Jordan stopped, feeling the building shift under his shoes. He said, "Then summon them all. I'll give them thunder." The auditorium filled like a storm gathering beneath a roof. Jordan faced the staff, every eye a silent jury. He said, "You will hear lies, but you will not see surrender," and the echo swallowed the room. Elena whispered, "Control the air or it controls you," and she adjusted her notes. Maya said, "Speak like fire or don't speak at all," and her stare was relentless. Casey said, "They want certainty, not slogans," and her voice carried regret. Jordan lifted his hand, steadied his breath, and said, "Our foundation stands if we stand on it together." The crowd shifted, torn between doubt and duty. Somewhere in the back a voice muttered, "But who betrayed us?" And the room thickened. Jordan knew thunder had only bought him seconds, not salvation. The server room hummed like a lie trying to keep its story straight, and the cold bit through suit fabric. "Maya Cross," said the breach, pivoted at two nodes that never talk, and her cursor hovered over a ghost path. Noah Reed said, "Someone spoofed my credentials with perfect clock drift," and shame threatened to color his voice. Jordan Hale said, "Precision that clean belongs to an insider," and the sentence felt like a verdict he hated. Elena Brooks said, "We quarantine the network without spooking the floor," and she drew a tight box on the plan. A red light blinked, then steadied, and the room seemed to inhale. Jordan said, "Set a snare with false filings and watch who bites," and the idea built its own pulse. Maya said, "We make the poison look like nectar," and her eyes never left the screen. The humming deepened, as if the building understood the trap. The hotel bar swore it was discreet, and the lamps wore their shame like velvet. Derek Vale said, "I can calm the funds if you give me wider authority," and his smile edited itself mid-breath. Elena Brooks said, "Authority without transparency turns into a trap," and she let the silence test him. Derek said, "You need a face investors can trust," and he gestured to a waiting camera crew outside in the lobby mirrors. Elena said, "Trust is earned in audits, not on carpets," and her glass stayed full. His phone lit with a message labeled "From no one," and he tucked it away like a secret rehearsal. Derek said, "Pick a hero now, or they will pick a villain," and his tone turned courteous as a blade. The bar made the deal glow warmer than it was, and the exit felt far. The private club smelled like old victories and recent defeats, and the fire framed the truth in red. Arthur King said, "You promoted comfort to chief strategist," and his cane tapped rhythm into the rug. Jordan Hale said, "I forgot that loyalty expires when power changes hands," and the admission cooled the room. Arthur said, "Your rival will offer certainty while you offer nuance," and the lesson sounded carved. Jordan said, "Then I will trade nuance for clarity and keep the truth," and the fire cracked like applause. Arthur said, "Clarity without proof is theater," and his eyes urged patience. Jordan said, "Proof arrives tonight if the bait draws teeth," and the clock above the mantel ticked louder. The portraits watched like jurors with long memories, and the night folded its arms. In compliance, the air tasted like paper and nerves, and the fluorescents hummed their tired hymn. Casey Miller said, "The snare caught a ping from a device on the executive subnet," and her cursor circled a timestamp that stung. Noah Reed said, "The packet burst looks hand-stitched, and the root masks our own tools," and anger steadied his hands. Maya Cross said, "We follow the echo, not the source, and map intent," and she paced like a metronome. Jordan Hale said, "Name the room before you name the person," and the order slowed their pulses. Casey said, "It points to the Treasury staging office," and silence vacuumed the space. Elena Brooks said, "Tread softly or it becomes theater," and she opened the door with a lawyer's breath. The hallway looked longer than it was, and the floor gave a patient creak. The subcommittee gathered with smiles that smelled like ink and knives, and the conference table gleamed like a stage. A director said, "Continuity demands interim authority," and the phrase walked to the head seat on its own. Victor Langston appeared on a muted tile beside the agenda, and his silence sold serenity. Maya Cross said, "You are voting to reward the arsonist without finding the match," and the stillness twitched. Elena Brooks said, "Any shift before audit completion invites litigation," and the word hung like a locked door. Jordan Hale said, "If you want stability, back proof not rumor," and he kept his hands still. A notification slid onto the screen from the snare, and the timing felt scripted. Power shifted in chair creaks and glances, and the vote waited like an ambush. The Treasury staging office breathed dust and secrets, and the locks complained like old men. Casey Miller said, "Access logs show a midnight visit that never tripped the cameras," and her cursor circled a time that felt guilty. Noah Reed said, "Our decoy filing pinged from a device registered to this subnet," and the sentence sharpened the air. Maya Cross said, "We move slow and touch nothing we can't unbreak," and she slid on gloves like an oath. Elena Brooks said, "We need chain of custody or the truth will die in court," and the room listened. Jordan Hale said, "Open the ceiling panel," and the stepladder wobbled while the tiles sighed. Noah said, "Found a burner laptop and a badge duplicator," and he steadied his breath. Casey said, "The badge number masks as an executive profile," and the silence thickened. Maya said, "Clone the drive, and keep the snare armed for a second bite," and the plan gathered teeth. Jordan said, "Whoever planted this will come back for proof of our panic," and even the vents held still. The elevator doors reflected Derek Vale like a coin that might not be real, and the lobby lights hummed their judgment. Derek said, "Investors want someone who can sign checks without trembling," and his smile arrived on schedule. Jordan said, "They want results, not signatures," and his gaze stayed level. Derek said, "Name me co-signer and I con the funds before close," and the promise work alone. Elena Brooks said, "Authority without oversight curdles into risk," and she stepped between them. Derek said, "Oversight is what failed you," and the words landed soft and cruel. Maya Cross said, "We will issue guidance when data clears," and her tone erased the echo. Derek said, "Guidance without authority is a lullaby," and his phone pulsed with private weather. Jordan said, "If you are the cure, why do you look like the salesman at the door?" And the metal doors breathed. Derek said, "Because the house is on fire," and the elevator chimed like a vote. The forensics lab hummed with clean menace, and the cloned drive spun like a coin deciding sides. Noah Reed said, "Remote sessions tunneled through a vendor account, then into Treasury," and he traced the route. Maya Cross said the decoy document was opened from a device bonded to Derek's badge profile, and the room leaned. Elena Brooks said, "Correlation is not proof, but it is a road," and she marked it in ink. Casey Miller said, "Vendor approval came last quarter with Derek's signature," and the form looked heavy. Jordan Hale said, "The road leads to his door, but we still need the key," and the fans answered. Maya said, "We seed a second decoy that forces a live handshake," and she drafted the trap. Elena said, "Outside counsel blesses every step," and her call connected like a seatbelt. Noah said, "When he bites, the handshake will brand the origin," and his voice steadied. Jordan said, "Then the house will watch the arsonist light the match," and the cursor blinked like a fuse. The investor call opened like a parade of polite knives, and the chat scrolled with appetite. Jordan Hale said, "We will publish verified facts within hours," and the ticker twitched. Victor Langston said, "We extend bridge financing for stability," and his broadcast smile warmed the feed. Maya Cross said, "That offer arrives too fast to be generous," and she time-stamped the move. A comment rose, "Install Derek now," and upvotes marched. Elena Brooks said, "Any change before audit completion endangers fiduciary duty," and her tone held the line. Victor said, "Leadership clarity is liquidity," and the phrase traveled like currency. Jordan said, "Clarity without integrity is insolvency," and the echo steadied him. Casey Miller said, "Media have pre-written headlines for a transfer," and the captions rehearsed. The call ended with applause from strangers, and the silence afterward felt measurable enough to invoice. The private dining room pretended to be sanctuary, but the silverware looked like instruments waiting for a procedure. A director said, "The market demands a gesture," and the candles argued with the air. Derek Vale said, "Name me interim," and the funds unlock by morning, and the promise wore velvet. A speaker clicked, and a calm voice said, "This is Marion Cole, we underwrite contingent on decisive leadership," and the room tilted. Elena Brooks said, "Conditional means coerced," and her napkin stayed folded. Maya Cross said, "Decisive for whom?" and the question stopped a waiter mid-step. Jordan Hale said, "If this lifeline is honest, it can survive daylight," and his eyes settled on the phone. Derek said, "Daylight is a luxury we do not own," and the board shifted like weather. A message buzzed on Jordan's screen, and the sender cut through noise. Arthur King wrote, "He called her from your office," and the candle flame leaned as if it had heard. The corridor outside Treasury felt like a throat, and the building held its breath. Casey Miller said, "Handshake, live on the decoy," and the status bar sprinted. Noah Reed said, "Signal triangulates here in 3 seconds," and his palms stopped sweating. Derek Vale stepped from the stairwell like he owned the hour, and his smile was late. Jordan Hale said, "Looking for something that isn't yours," and the keycard in Derek's hand paused midair. Derek said, "I'm securing evidence you were too slow to guard," and his tone asked for applause. Maya Cross said, "Then why tunnel through a vendor mask you approved?" and her eyes did not blink. Derek said, because optics matter more than process tonight, and the lie dressed as policy. The ceiling vent clicked as if taking notes, and the snare stamped its brand. Jordan said, either you're the fire, or you're fanning it for someone richer, and the hallway narrowed. Glass walls turned the conference room into an aquarium for sharks who preferred silence. Maya Cross said, this is the live handshake, source tagged Derek's device, and the map burned lines. Derek Vale said Elena asked me to test controls under pressure, and the board inhaled. Elena Brooks said, I requested resilience checks, not sabotage, and her tone filed a motion. Jordan Hale said, vendor tunnels badge clone, midnight access, and each word hammered. Casey Miller said, cameras show Derek near Treasury at the exact ping, and the timestamp pinned him. Derek said, I did what leadership refused, and his smile cracked at the edges. Noah Reed said the path includes a blind relay we have not named, and the room tilted. The chat on a tablet flickered with words like interim, clarity, and cure, and the water felt red. Elena's office smelled like ink and thunder about to arrive, and the blinds cut the city into stripes. Jordan Hale said, tell me you did not make him your glove, and the desk felt smaller. Elena Brooks said, I made him a mirror because you would not see, and her eyes didn't flinch. Jordan said, you're the CFO, not the executioner, and the words seemed fragile. Elena said, I am the custodian of survival, and comfort tried to bankrupt us, and the syllables were steel. A silent phone lit a private thread, and the name read Marion Cole. Elena said, we had one chance to replace doubt with certainty, and the screen dimmed. Jordan said, you recruited money that wants my head before the truth, and the blinds shifted with wind. Elena said, I recruited leverage, and the portrait behind her looked tired. The calm she wore felt borrowed from a colder room. The secure bridge chimed like an altar bell, and two faces arrived with practiced calm. Marion Cole said, I am not your enemy, I am your insurance, and the word tasted expensive. Victor Langston said, stability is the product, and we have it in stock, and his smile traveled. Jordan Hale said, you funded a crisis to sell the cure, and the sentence cut without shouting. Elena Brooks said, I designed a corridor to safety, not a coup, and her breath was level. Marion said, our covenants trigger at dawn unless leadership clarifies, and the threat wore pearls. Maya Cross said, clarify means replace, and the transcript captured it. Victor said, markets bless certainty, and the chat agreed like weather. Jordan said, certainty without truth is cartel, and the call ran colder. The clock on the wall moved too loudly for a digital object. Security waited like a punctuation mark at the end of a sentence too long. Jordan Hale said, you can still walk me back from this, and the hallway tunneled the sound. Elena Brooks said, I walked us from ruin to a price we could pay, and her eyes stayed dry. Maya Cross said, your price sells the spine, and the elevator chimed. Casey Miller said, release ready on your word, and her thumb hovered. Jordan said, publish the audit trail and the vendor tunnel, and the order steadied the floor. Derek Vale watched from a distance like a headline that aged badly, and his shoulders fell. Elena said, the board has the votes at noon, and the truth wore no makeup. Jordan said, then let them vote against the daylight, and the send key clicked. The building exhaled as if it had been bracing since the first siren. The boardroom swelled with voices, but none were music, and the storm outside drummed as if voting too. Jordan Hale said, you will not write me out with forged ink, and the table vibrated under his palm. Elena Brooks said, this is not exile, it is survival, and her words were threaded with steel. Victor Langston said, markets already anointed their choice, and his half-smile rode on silence. Marion Cole said, our covenant forces clarity, and clarity arrives with Derek, and her voice turned the page. Maya Cross said clarity scripted by conspirators is a counterfeit, and she slid the audit trail onto the screen. Casey Miller said, every relay tunnels back to one orchestrator, and the highlighted name burned bright. Derek Vale said, Proof means nothing when the vote seals without me, and he raised his chin. Jordan said, then we cut the vote open, and the storm pressed harder against the glass. The vote tallies flickered across the monitor like blood pressure on a dying patient. Jordan Hale said, this is a verdict written before the trial, and the numbers climbed against him. Elena Brooks said, you refused to steady the wheel, so they chose another hand, and her calm sounded cruel. Derek Vale said the interim crown fits cleaner, and he pulled the chair a breath closer. Maya Cross said interim doesn't erase the sabotage, and her pen clattered to the floor. Casey Miller said, audit trails show Derek planting the decoy bites, and her cursor locked him in. Derek said, you can't punish ambition dressed as loyalty, and his teeth showed. Jordan said, ambition without honor burns every house it touches, and his voice cracked the air. The screen froze as thunder blacked the lights for a single, shuddering second. The lights returned like grudging witnesses, and the air turned raw. Marion Cole said without acceptance, the covenants dissolve, and her voice flattened the room. Victor Langston said, our bridge offer expires with patience, and his smile tightened. Jordan Hale said, you orchestrated panic, then sold the cure, and his fingers stabbed at their screens. Elena Brooks said, I sought stability, not treason, and her jaw twitched once. Maya Cross said, every covenant clause proves coercion, and her slide revealed signatures in sequence. Casey Miller said, timeline syncs their calls with Derek's moves, and the chart bled lines between names. Derek Vale said, markets don't care about morality, and his words floated smug. Jordan said, markets care when truth detonates, and the thunder answered on cue. The board members shifted like furniture deciding sides, and the hum of AC felt like static. Elena Brooks said, I never wanted his collapse, only protection, and her voice cracked but not enough. Jordan Hale said, protection that kills the patient isn't medicine, and his stare broke through. Derek Vale said, you wanted him out as much as I did, and the words tore at her. Maya Cross said, divide them and you win, confess, and you heal, and her hand reached. Elena said, I walked too far into the dark, and her breath trembled. Marion Cole said, confession doesn't annul a contract, and her face glowed calm on the screen. Victor Langston said, contracts stand, leadership falls, and his tone seal. Jordan said, only if truth sleeps, and his voice rose like a hammer. The board murmured, and one chair scraped like a blade. The climax landed as if the storm had crawled inside, and the air shook. Jordan Hale said, you all wanted certainty, now watch the certainty of betrayal, and he dragged Derek's live session onto the main screen. Casey Miller said, this handshake still feeds Victor's servers, and the evidence flared. Maya Cross said, the arsonist was never interim, he was always an agent, and the board gasped. Derek Vale said, deals demand players, not martyrs, and his mask slipped. Elena Brooks said, I gave him the corridor but not the fire, and her head dropped. Marion Cole said, contain this, or we pull the cord, and her voice lost polish. Victor Langston said, truth costs more than the cure, and his smile cracked. Jordan said, then let the cost bankrupt you, and thunder burst in sync. The board chair whispered, the vote is void, and the empire staggered. Dawn bled gray across the skyline, and the boardroom smelled of paper, ozone, and loss. Jordan Hale said, the empire remains, but the throne is cracked, and his words clung to silence. Elena Brooks said, I will carry the weight of my miscalculation, and her eyes stayed fixed on the window. Maya Cross said, markets will scream, but truth is oxygen, and they will breathe again. And her tone steadied the air. Casey Miller said, the press already spins it as collapse, and her tablet vibrated like a funeral bell. Victor Langston said, collapse is the first step toward acquisition, and his smile dared them. Marion Cole said, without Jordan, financing reverts, and her voice echoed clinical finality. Jordan said, I will not resign for your convenience, and the table absorbed the vow. Derek Vale said, your refusal makes you obsolete, and he slumped as guards shifted near him. Arthur King appeared at the doorway, cane tapping, and said, "Obsolete only when forgotten." The press hall roared with questions that struck like hail, and flashbulbs carved the air into fragments. Jordan Hale said, "Truth survived the ambush, and so did we," and the microphones leaned closer. Maya Cross said, "We published the audit trail live, and the feed behind him pulse." Casey Miller said, "This is the proof they cannot drown," and she angled her tablet to the cameras. Reporters shouted, "Who betrayed you? Who leads now?" And the wall of sound cracked. Elena Brooks said, "I failed in vigilance, and accountability begins with me," and the room froze. Jordan said, "We bleed, but we do not bow," and the statement lit a spark. Victor Langston's face appeared on a rival channel, declaring, "They are hollow. Stability is here," and boos scattered. Arthur King muttered, "Every empire dies twice, first in trust, then in memory," and his cane tapped like punctuation. The trading floor looked like a battlefield after shelling, screens lit with scars of red and green. Casey Miller said, "Liquidity stabilizes slowly, but the narrative bleeds faster," and her voice cracked. Maya Cross said, "Narrative can be reforged if forged in fire," and her hand skimmed the charts. Jordan Hale said, "Then we trade not in numbers, but in truth," and his reflection shone on the glass wall. Elena Brooks said, "Investors will demand my resignation," and her tone was steady but tired. Jordan said, "They will demand it, but I will own it," and he met her eyes. Noah Reed said, "The breach code still runs on outside servers," and his hands flew over keys. Maya said, "We drown it with louder proof," and the plan carried heat. Arthur King whispered, "Rebuilding is slower than betrayal, but both last forever," and the room breathed it in. The rooftop trembled with wind and neon reflection, and silence walked with them. Jordan Hale said, "If I fall, they write me as villain. If I stand, they call me tyrant," and his voice thin. Maya Cross said, "They can't write your soul, only the ending," and her eyes caught his. Elena Brooks said, "I made a corridor for traitors. Let me block it now," and her plea felt raw. Jordan said, "Your guilt doesn't erase my scars," and his fists flexed. Casey Miller said, "Headlines tomorrow decide legacies," and her phone buzzed with drafts. Arthur King said, "History doesn't read headlines, it reads consequence," and his cane pressed steady. Jordan said, "Then consequence will carry my name whether praised or cursed," and the neon flared behind him. The wind bent their coats, and the city waited below like a jury. The final chamber was silent but heavy, walls filled with echoes of decisions. Jordan Hale sat alone, voice low. "Power consumed me, betrayal scarred me, but ambition never saved me." He stared at the fractured glass of his reflection. Maya Cross entered, saying, "You may not have saved the empire, but you saved the truth," and her tone wrapped sharp steel in velvet. Elena Brooks said, "My confession will follow me, but your fight will haunt them," and her words bent like glass under pressure. Arthur King said, "Survival is not victory, but sometimes it is enough," and his cane tapped like a coda. Casey Miller whispered, "They will remember you not for comfort, but for the war you fought against it," and the words trembled. Jordan rose, saying, "Then let history choose," and the chamber dimmed. The last sound was silence, heavy, unbroken, final.